Now let us continue with the class on the Surangama Sutra. Currently, we are talking about the animate and inanimate world. Previously, in our last class, we talked about, according to Vajrayana, how there is the basic ground, and out of that basic ground, there would be the ground manifestation, and then from such ground manifestation, there would be all kinds of confusions. And such kind of confused sentient beings did not recognize the nature, therefore they would continuously to stray in samsara. And this world is filled with all kinds of dharma and the arising of the conditioned dharma. So today we will talk about the formation of the inanimate world and the animate world. This part is very similar to what has been taught by Longchenpa. To liberate all sentient beings, let us generate the supreme bodhicitta. Now, let's continue with the Surangama Sutra. So let's look at the continuance of the animate and the inanimate world. The teachings according to which fulfilling treasury, especially on the formation of the inanimate world, is very similar. Lots of the great masters of the past would quote from the Book of Change, or from Confucianism, or quoting some of the traditional teachings on the 5 elements. However, this way of connecting the dots with the traditional teachings are not agreed upon by some of the other Dharma teachers. They claim that, well, those are the teachings by the non-Buddhist schools, therefore it is not reasonable to quote from them. We should be able to explain the Buddhist teachings just through the Buddhist theories. There is no need to quote from the others. So we can see that according to Master Han Shan, where he gave lots of teachings, and a few of the great masters of the past had different opinions. But I think when you look into it, you would be able to understand their point of view. Let's look at the formation of the inanimate world. The Buddha over here says that the interaction of bright enlightenment and dark emptiness sets them in the perpetual rotation. Thus, there is the pervasiveness of wind which supports the world. Over here, this bright enlightenment, according to some great masters, the interaction of bright enlightenment refers to the illusion of ignorance, which then projected outwards and becomes the dark emptiness, which is ignorance. The subject and object being interacted. Since at first there's the manifestation of ignorance, and then outwardly there is the ignorance or darkness or emptiness, this kind of manifestation. There is the interaction, there is the movement that occurs with the two. According to some commentaries, it says that it is of one type of ignorance and with an elusive movement. With such kind of movement of false concepts, there formed the wind wheel. With the two supporting each other and interacting with each other sets them in a perpetual rotation, which is the wind wheel. So the source of wind wheel actually comes from the false mind of human beings. It is because of ignorance, because of such a movement, and with the condition of such a movement and causes and conditions being matured, there manifested the wind wheel. And the wind wheel is of movement, because we know that the characteristics of the wind wheel is of movement. So the whole world, after having this wind wheel, there is a pervasiveness of wind which supports the world. On top of a wind wheel, there's a water wheel. Then on top of water wheel, there's the ground wheel. And on top of the ground wheel, there comes the mountains and rivers and the ground. This is the formation of our world, the basis for the world to rely on, according to, for example, with our Tantra Shastra and other Shastras all talk about this. Also, when we talked about the empty kalpa, which is really not of any difference, though over here it didn't talk about the wheel of space, but this is well recognized by everyone, so it didn't really talk about it here. On top of that wheel, there is the wind wheel. With the special power of the wind wheel, this world has been supported. And in the sutra, it says that because emptiness produces movement, hardened light sets up a solidity which is the store of metal. And this metal wheel or gold wheel, according to which fulfilling treasury talks about the upholding wind, and this wind, the wind of metal, which is also a type of wheel of ground, wheel of earth, sourced from the wind wheel, because after the wind wheel moves and slowly, there's the solid particles started to gather and forms this more solid wheel. And then the sutra says, this bright enlightenment makes this hardness. It is because the dualistic thoughts of the sentient beings will slowly solidify. Thus, there is the pervasiveness of the metal which secures the land. So this particular solid material that sourced from the wind wheel is called this metal wheel. The metal wheel or the ground wheel can uphold and secure the lands. This is the metal wheel that is secure and solid, that could support the ground or support the countries and the world. This is the second one. Then the third one says, obstinate attachment to unenlightened awareness results in the formation of metal, while the vibration of illusion awareness causes wind to rise up. So the next one, so this part talks about the wind, the fire wheel. The wind and metal rub together, thus there's the light of fire, which is changeable by nature. We just talked about how the solidifying of the dualistic thoughts becomes metal, becomes this element, and then eventually formed the wheel of metal. On top of that, there is the wind, which upholds the nature of movement. The wind and metal would rub together. So previously, we already understood that the wind upholds the nature which is movement, and then the gold that is solid, but the two would rub together. The wind forms the gold wheel, which then forms the golden ground. But the wind that moves with the gold wheel that doesn't move, one which upholds the nature of solidity and the other one of movement, one upholds the characteristic of solidity and the other one of movement. By rubbing each other, from the friction there is light of fire, which then forms the fire element. Or you can call it a fire wheel as well. So we already covered the wind wheel, the metal wheel, and then the fire wheel. Over here it says it is light of fire, but it is the fire wheel. So this particular fire, it could be a type of, you can understand it as a type of force, but it could also be actual flames. At the time of the world's formation, whenever we talk about the formation of the world, let it be the Big Bang, or when we talk about the ocean and the fire, sometimes we can see that this world is quite wondrous. From our conceptual mind, from that point of view, we cannot agree that the water and fire can be together. But to scientists, they can. Whenever we look at the kind of knowledge in the sutras and taught in Buddhism, we shouldn't just think that this is very simple and this is just all made up and this is wrong. But the science is completely different, because whatever the science proposes, it must be true. There are people without the solid foundations in Buddhism, or without the right view, they would constantly look at Buddhism teachings with the wrong view and would constantly question the Buddhist teachings. But why don't you question the teachings given in science? Why would you say that whatever science says would be correct without further investigation? Nowadays, there are lots of studies on the formation of the world, of the universe, of the cosmos, of the black hole, of the ground, of the ocean. Different people, different scholars, different scientists, people from different points of view have different understandings of it. And you have to understand that Buddhism simply proposes another perspective. Let us look at the next one, which is the wheel of water. The brightness of the metal produces moisture, and from the light of fire, steam arises. Thus, there is the pervasiveness of water, which encompasses realms in the 10 directions. Now, with the conditions of metal and wind being matured, then there is the moist that arises from the metal. Whatever kinds of metal or something cooling that we see, for example, on metal, sometimes we would be able to see a layer of steam or a layer of moist or layer of dew on top of glass and crystal. Sometimes we see that. And then because of that moist, that dampness got together with the light of fire. With such light of fire, after the moist and the light of fire being in contact, then it would evaporate and then it would become rain. Such kind of a rain would slowly extend all over the 10 directions. Therefore, over here it says that the wheel of water would be all-encompassing, or it would encompass the realms in the 10 directions. according to Abhidharma, or wish-fulfilling treasury, where it says that there is the first the wheel of wind and then the wheel of water. But according to the commentary, it says that the wheel of water would be prior to the wheel of metal. This teaching is the same with the Hinayana teachings, not only just the Hinayana teaching, including the Avatamsaka Sutra and Uttara Tantra Shastra, the Mahayana teachings also share the same perspective. So though there are of two different perspectives or two different descriptions, the two can both work. Here's the explanation. First of all, if the water wheel were to be prior to that of the metal wheel, then we can understand it in such a way that the water wheel has already been evaporated, and the water has already been evaporated into the space, and then there's the precipitation. And let it be the water or fire or the metal, even the fire wheel can contain water or moist within it, because even nowadays we can see that the earth is made up by the 70% of water. So the formation of the earth or the formation of the world can be very much related to water. Therefore, there are different ways of explanations. I hope that whenever we hear the different perspectives or there are different ways of describing it in terms of its orders, I really hope that you do not hold on to one answer as being the absolute correct answer and there could be no other ways of explaining it. I think that is very narrow-minded. We should rather contemplate in such a way that because there are such differences in all of our karmic tendencies and the karmas that we've accumulated, the karmas of the sentient beings are so much varied. Therefore, the different elements could follow a slightly different order as well, and it could manifest in front of the sentient beings with different orders as well. So when it comes to the formation of the world, let it be beginning from the wind or beginning from the water or beginning from the wind and then the metal first before the water, we shouldn't be so narrow-minded saying that only one great master is speaking of the correct opinion, but the other one is wrong. Since we have such limited wisdom, we can't come to such conclusions. When you look at the time that you had to take an exam, for example, you thought you remembered everything. You thought you wrote down all of the correct answers, but when you look at the grades you got, then you realize, oh, I had made a mistake over there. So when it comes to looking at the different points of views of the previous great masters, we should rather not be so arrogant and too certain about our own judgment based on our own conceptual mind. Since recently this is our exam period, therefore I noticed that you can empathize more with my examples if I were to give examples on exams. So it is quite crucial to utilize the current situations with the example so that your mind can be drawn to the Dharma. And then the next one says that fire rises and water falls, and the combination sets up a solidity. What is wet becomes the oceans and seas. What is dry becomes the continents and islands. Now, since we have already covered on the four great elements, and then this part, there are the descriptions on how the various things started to gather. For example, here it talks about the fire and water. The fire rises, the force would go up, the energy would go up, and then in terms of water, it falls. Therefore, after such combination of the two, there sets up a solidity. And whatever is wet, whatever upholds the property of the water, upholds the water, becomes ocean and seas, and then whatever is dry becomes the continents and islands. Because of this, fire often rises up in the oceans, and on the continents the streams and rivers ever flow. Because of these kinds of causes and conditions, as we have already spoken of, the water and fire, since they have such kind of combination, therefore the fire would also rise in the ocean, such as, for example, eruption of a volcano, or the fires sometimes would arise from the water. According to Contemplation of the Mind Sutra and the Parinirvana Sutra, you can see that there are the commentaries talking about how the Naga king would eat water and fire, the water fire, which is the fire within the water. And when the bodhisattvas enter into the ocean, there would be fires inside the ocean that they can perceive. There are lots of teachings about that. So that is the fire in water. And then on our islands, or on our earth, the continents, and on our ground, we see all kinds of rivers and the streams flow, because if there is a fire inside of water, then inside there's a solid continents, then there are rivers such as the Yangtze, the Yellow River, the Sirta River that we have over here, or whatever rivers you have at your hometown. And then the next one talks about when the power of water is less than that of the fire, high mountains result. So it is the mountain rocks give off sparks when struck and become liquid when melt. When the fire has more of a stronger power, then the mountains would form. And the mountain rocks give off sparks when struck. Earlier we talked about when the water and fire both becomes water, then it will become in a liquid form. For example, the mold of iron or of bronze, or whatever kinds of metal and minerals that can be melted into a liquid form. So whenever water and fire make a combination, if the fire wins or overpowers water, then it becomes the mountain. According to many commentaries, it talks about why the Buddha talks about the fire and water. It is because fire is a representation of the aggression, and water is the representation of greed. So the mountains and rivers, they are simply the manifestation of our greed, anger, and ignorance. It is simply the illusory manifestation of our dualistic mind. When we look at the formation of our world, there's the alternation of water and fire elements, which is probably because of the sentient beings' dualistic thoughts are getting lots of fluctuations, are getting more and more severe. For example, because of the aggression of sentient beings are getting so severe, the fire calamities nowadays are quite detrimental nowadays. On top of that, the different countries would flex their muscles by having all kinds of military exercises. Those are definitely signs of the elevation of aggression. According to some commentaries, it says that on top of aggression, if there are arrogance, then that would become the high mountains. Whenever we look at those tall mountains, such as Himalayas and the Ganges mountain, Mount Kailash, we would think that those are really beautiful, but all of those mountains are simply the manifestations of the sentient beings' aggression and the arrogance. Some says that once there is one thought of false mind. There is the manifestation of the four great elements that is stated by Master O.E. and a lot of great masters. And then when the power of earth is less than that of water, the outcome is grasses and trees. So it is that growths and metals turn to ashes when burned and lose water when twisted. If the earth element were to overpower the water, then there would be grass and trees and the growth that would grow. But when there is fire that burns them down, then they simply turned into ashes, which is earth essentially. And the grass and trees, once you twist them, they would ooze out water, would turn into water element. Earlier, we talked about all the places for water and earth and mountains and groves to reside. So this part, it talks about the groves, where the how it resides within the groves. Master O.E. and other great masters talks about, we can see that the earth, water, fire, and wind, they're simply the manifestations out of the illusory mind or the false mind. To be more explicit, our false mind has the two aspects. One is movement and one is still. The movement aspect would manifest as wind, and then the solid or the solid and still aspect would manifest as fire element. So our dualistic thoughts, sometimes it moves, sometimes it stills. Therefore, there are all kinds of manifestations, and because of the continuity of the different kinds of dualistic thoughts of stillness and of movement, so this inanimate world would also manifest as having highs and lows. And whenever our greed would increase, then there's the manifestation of flood. And whenever there's the aggression that manifests, then the overall manifestation would be fire disasters as well as warfares. And similarly, ignorance would cause confusion and forgetfulness as well. This is really the collective karma that we have because of our collective karma of greed, aggression, and ignorance. Then in our outer world, in this external phenomena, there are all kinds of manifestations. Falseness is produced with the interaction as the seeds, and from these causes and conditions comes the continuity of the world. Now, this false mind that is fused with anger, aggression, and ignorance, this kind of dualistic conceptual mind acted as a seed, which then made this world to continuously to exist. This inanimate world, the coarseness or its warmth is very much caused by our grasping and our aversion. When we look at the severity of the fires that we can see in different parts of the world nowadays, the frequency of such kind of fire disasters that's happening is much more so than the past 70 to 70 years. What the inanimate world could bring to us is very difficult to say. If this inanimate world were to change, it would change really quickly. And as sentient beings, we have such simple and such menial life compared to the changes of this inanimate world. Therefore, whenever there is a change to the inanimate world, the sentient beings would have to adapt to the changes, or would have to change accordingly. Many people would think that, the Buddhism claims that the world is created because of the sentient being's thoughts, and that is not possible. How could my mind create this world? In fact, we had already talked about how the sentient being's false mind or the dualistic thoughts, as well as the four great elements, acted as causes and conditions. When such causes and conditions matures and changes with each other, the world would manifest. This is the dependent arising. The dependent arising, when observed in the ultimate truth, it is not obtained. But in the conventional truth, it is definitely a solid, and it is definitely a pattern that everything would follow, that nobody could simply overturn it. It is not that after you studied it for a few years or studied until the PhD degree and then you'll be able to come to such conclusion. It's not like that at all. It is not that you will be able to come to this conclusion just by being a scholar. Rather, the Buddha had accumulated merit for immeasurable numbers of kalpas and purified his mind, and that's the kind of wisdom that he gained through such. Let it be the formation, the duration, or the cessation of this whole process. From certain aspect, it is easy to understand such dependent arising. Sometimes it's rather very difficult. Let us continue to look at the animate world. And then the Buddha said that, moreover, Purna, the false brightness is none other than the mistake of adding light to enlightenment. So over here, the false brightness is not the kind of brightened enlightenment, the luminosity that we talk about in a positive sense. Rather, it is a very obvious and a very coarse concept. And this false brightness is none other than the mistake of adding light to enlightenment. It is simply this mind slowly, this luminous mind slowly get confused and it becomes sentient beings. If we were to understand it at this moment, in the present moment, it is wisdom. If not, then it is ignorance. Using the example of how a prince, not knowing that he is a prince, rather he's been a beggar since the beginning. So it is simply of a mistake. When I read the collection of the five lamps in the Chinese Buddhism, which is a book of the Chinese Buddhism, I read that someone whose name is Jing Chao, when he read this particular part, when it talks about the false brightness is none other than the mistake of adding light to enlightenment, he got quite confused, and he thought that before the world were formed and the sentient beings had not formed yet, then how could there be ignorance? He got really confused. At that moment, if there's a guru to give him a pointing out, that would be really great. Anyhow, this is a Zen Buddhism story. So the story goes that at the time he was really confused. There was one night he slept inside of a monastery, and he woke up by the sound of a gong. And after hearing that sound, he attained enlightenment. So when we goes to bed tonight, maybe you should read this particular verse, and then in the morning you can be woken up by your alarm clock, and then you would be able to attain enlightenment. And then if you were to attain enlightenment tomorrow morning, you don't have to go to class anymore. Just as Phuntsok Rinpoche, when he attained enlightenment, he didn't go to class for a few days and kept on dreaming about Sakya Pandita. If tomorrow morning you were to get late, then that means you attain enlightenment. after reading this verse. After the falseness of an object is established, the faculty of understanding cannot transcend. Now let's look at this false mind. Once it's been established, then the faculty of understanding, the mind that could understand, would not be able to transcend such kind of falsity, and that kind of faculty of understanding would not be able to surpass that of the false, because the false mind within a certain to a certain extent it has a great power. Once it becomes confusion, it becomes something rather very solid. At that time, your true mind, your nature, your faculty of understanding cannot really get into it. It is just like when sentient beings get very confused. Even if you were to encounter a great master, an enlightened one to give you direct pointing out, even after giving you the most profound teachings, you probably won't be able to feel anything at all. Even if you were to have a little bit of it, one would be losing it very quickly. For example, after receiving the Vajrayana teachings, some people would feel that, oh, have I attained enlightenment? But after 2 days, even if a little bit of things were to happen to that person, they would not feel very happy anymore. So that is not the kind of enlightenment. And then it says, due to this cause and conditions, hearing does not go beyond sound, and seeing does not surpass form. Form, smell, taste, and objects of touch, six falseness are realized. Because of them, there is division into seeing, sensation, hearing, and knowing. Originally, within our Tathagata all of the form, sound, smell, touch, all of the four great elements and such kind of natures are already perfectly already perfected within our nature. Our nature would be able to see that, but because of confusion, our ear faculty cannot go beyond of the extent of or sphere of sound, and our eyes cannot surpass that of the form. The six falsities didn't talk about Dharma, right? I think it is the same in Tibetan. It didn't really translate or have the word Dharma. It then over here it says a form, smell, taste, and object of touch, but didn't say Dharma. But the six defilements rely on our dualistic thoughts, and the six root consciousness the teaching over here is very similar to the Vajrayana teaching, because after there is the ignorance, then we would not be able to see our true mind and true nature. And then there is the formation of the six defilements and the six consciousness, the six falseness. Did you read into other commentaries? Did you see any other analysis? I didn't get time to read it. Maybe you should look into it later. Okay, so look into the six falseness after. Maybe I can't quite explain it right now. Over here it says that let it be the seeing, hearing, and the sense of the external world. If we were not to be deluded, we would just be like the Buddha. We will be omniscient. We will be able to see everything and know everything without any limitations. But it is because of such kind of delusion, such kind of falseness, we are limited to this world that we can cognize. Similar karma binds together unions, and separation bring about transformation. The reason we would be able to be born in this world is because the similar karma. Birth from womb and birth from eggs are the main methods. And the similar karma includes the karma of the father and of the mother as well as the child. These three karmas are similar for these three, and after the three karmas are collected, then there would be such kind of birth. If one karma is not met or is not matured, then there would be no such kind of result. Just imagine to lack in the maturation of the karma of the child or of the father or of the mother, then there would be no birth. The commentary has a little bit different explanation, but I think it would be easier to understand this through the four different types of birth. Then the one on the union and the separation bring about a transformation. Over here it talks about the birth through moist and warmth. The consciousness of sentient beings would unite and mix with the external phenomena, let it be the earth element or the element of water. After such a combination, then there is the birth through moist. By the karma, there is the birth through moist, through womb, and through egg. And then there is the power of emanation or the power of transformation. That is the birth through emanation. This is the binding, union, separation, and transformation. And then the next one talks about the birth through womb and the process of it. One sees that a bright spot is generated. At the sight of a bright spot, conception comes into being. So at the time of conception, the Bardo being in pitch black kind of situation, that is the experience of Bardo in darkness. At that time, you won't be able to see other beings' actions. Rather, you can only see the beings who have close connection to you in terms of the karma. So you would be able to see that your parents are having intercourse, and then through far away, it is almost like you can see this brightness just like a light. Just like there are lights, and then the moth would fly right into those lights. So the Bardo beings at the time of seeing brightness, because of karma and because of such kind of brightness and sentient beings living in such pitch black situation in this kind of darkness, then at the time of seeing the brightness of the parents somewhere, then naturally this Bardo body would like to go to the parents. And then at the time of seeing the proceedings of the parents, there is the dualistic thoughts that arise in the Bardo being, thinking that I also want to enter. I also want to be part of that intercourse. And then because of that, then there is the entering. And then over here in the sutra it says that different views produce hatred, similar views create love. So The differing views, what does it mean? Different view, it is over here, this is exactly the same as described in Abhidharma and other sutras and shastras. It is to say that if you were going to be reborn as a male at the time of seeing the woman, then you would share the similar view, which then creates love. But at the time of seeing a man, then there would be different view which produce hatred. So by seeing the male, that is different view, and seeing the female, that is a similar view, that is, if this mortal being were going to be born as a male. This description is exactly the same as Abhidharma. At the time of seeing the parents having sexual intercourse, the future gender is very much related to who you are going to generate a sense of grasping and whom aversion. At the time when you see the parents, either you generate hatred towards father and grasping towards the mother. That is how a male is born. So this particular teaching is exactly the same as described in Abhidharma. And then it says the flow of love becomes a seed and conception is drawn into the womb. At the time of such sexual intercourse, the father's sperm and the mother's womb becomes a seed. This seed, you would grasp this seed as a self. This is me, this is myself. And after accepting this as a self, this is the conception. Intercourse happens with a mutual attraction of similar karma. It is only if you were to have the similar karma or have connections with those sentient beings, then you would be able to find them as your parents. It is not that you can be born by any parents. So the parents of ours, in fact, had very deep connections to us. Could be virtuous karmic connections or the non-virtuous. But these kind of connections are indeed very important. If you don't have the similar karma, then there are so many bardo beings, but the beings with those kind of close karmic connections are very rare. And so there are causes and conditions that create the Kalala and our Buddha and the rest. Then this is entering into the womb. Previously, we also studied the different types of shapes in the womb. For example, there's the foam, the bubble, flesh, and the shape of a fish, of a tortoise. Those had been taught within the words of my perfect teacher, as well as resting the mind, and various sutras and shastras with the different causes and conditions throughout the process of entering into the womb. At first, there is the very smooth textured for the first 7 days, which probably is similar to snot, and then later in a foam, and slowly will start to grow in the womb. The Tibetan folk tradition would say that the human being would be born after 9 months and 10 days after being inside of a womb. According to the Sutra of the Great Jewel Heap, it says that it's 38 times of 7. According to some of the Chinese Chinese folk tradition says about 10 months, but the 10 months is probably a little too long. According to Entering into the Womb Sutra, there are lots of descriptions of the entering and the process of how a fetus would develop in a womb. Anyhow, the sentient beings, let it be of any type of birth, can be born in certain ways because of their different karma. The karma is the most important, and then the birth is simply, or the way of the birth is simply a type of causes and condition. Let it be the birth from womb or from egg. Your karma is the most important because it would fit into or correlate to your karma. As long as it correlates to your karma, then it could have all kinds of ways. The womb-born, egg-born, moisture-born, and transformation-born come about in response to the egg-born come from thought, mainly because of the dualistic thoughts, and it is not very much based on grasping, or at least that is not the most important. And when it comes to the womb-born, are due to emotions or due to graspings, especially to the parents and to touch and to lust. When it comes to the moisture-born, it arises from union, mainly from touch, from a combination, from a sense of combination. So there has to be a certain type of touch with the external phenomena, external material. For example, a bug has to then be in touch with the external material, external causes and conditions, so that it could be able to born. And then transformation occurs through separation, because these type of beings had already separated from all kinds of dharma that would give rise. Emotion, thought, union, and separation go through further changes, and from all the karma received, one either rises or sinks. These 4 types of birth has the uncertain changes. For example, in this lifetime, I may be born through womb, and maybe next life is through egg, or through moist, or through transformation, or through emanation. So there are different ways and different changes to the way that you can be born. And those kinds of changes are from the different karmas received. One either rises or sinks. From these causes and conditions comes the continuity of living beings. It is because of karma. Without karma, then the sentient beings cannot take rebirth, cannot take birth. And because of the different karma, one would be able to either rise or sink in samsara, just as a bee that's trapped inside of a vase. The ups and downs of the sentient beings, that is the causes and conditions, comes to the continuity of the living beings. So this is the animate world. This is a teaching on the inanimate and animate world. It's rather quite easy to understand. But I think the traditional Chinese are rather very difficult to understand, so it does need some explanation. Let's stop here today. Chubum Solen Joa Joa Joa